2021 on our first meeting of the new year. We have 4 committees meeting tonight, plus the committee of the whole. So a full evening and several presentations with guests joining us. So we'll lead off with the Planning and Development Committee, and that is chaired by Council Member Fall and joined by members Reisner, Grace, and Smedley.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to start our evening with one of the presentations from the Economic Development Commission Council. I have Molly Fitzgerald, who will give us a report. Normally, we do support, in addition with the county and Ohio University, the mission of the EDC. And it's normally on a 3-year contract basis. And they come almost every January to give a presentation and an update. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Chris. I do want to share my screen, so I'm hoping that this will work. Let's see here. All right. Let me know once you see it, and I'll continue.
You're good.
All right.
I see it.
Great. All right. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to be here this evening. As Chris mentioned, the City of Athens has been a great supporter of the EDC, and our renewal will be up at the end of this year. So at that time, we can revisit renewal. But I just wanted to make sure that I presented a nice overview to the council, showing some of the initiatives that we've been up to this past year, which, as we all know, has been quite a crazy year. So I'm going to jump right in and try to stick to the 15-minute allotment as best I can. And to do that, I'm not going to go through this overview. These are all items I'll touch base on throughout the presentation, but it just gives you a little synopsis. So I want to start by going over the funding that the EDC was able to secure this year. Despite the COVID-19 implications, we were able to bring in just over $4 million. This is funding that goes directly to businesses for rehabilitation efforts and to workforce needs to ensure that we are facilitating job creation and retention within the county and the city. So I'll touch on all of these throughout the presentation. One thing I do want to mention is this Jobs Ohio Inclusion Grant, kind of in the middle of the chart. So the Jobs Ohio Inclusion Grant was a new program this year that was for smaller and medium-sized businesses in distressed communities or businesses that are owned by an underrepresented population. We were really excited by this program because, a lot of our businesses are small and medium-sized companies that don't typically qualify for Jobs Ohio programs because they can't meet the job creation numbers. So the inclusion grant kind of takes that into consideration and requires a much smaller job commitment. So we were successful getting 2 of those inclusion grants in Athens County and the city of Athens, really. The first was for Jack Yo's Brewery to expand their bakery operations. And the second was for a company that you might not be familiar with, but it's called Amtech NA. They have a parent company over in Germany, but they manufacture valves for fluid to prevent fluid leaks, and really takes that technology and puts it into energy efficiencies with valve leaks and all of that. So really exciting there. And I do also just want to mention under program sponsorships, that includes the Lunch and Learns that we host through the Entrepreneurial Development Group and the Young Athens Professionals Meetup, both of these which are significantly lower than most years since we only had 3 months of both of those group meetings. So one of the things we've done this year is revisited our strategic plan. It's wise to revisit strategic plans every 5 years or so. And then given the economic toll that COVID-19 has had on our community, we figured it would be a really great time to revisit some of those strategies and maybe refocus and align them with recovery efforts for our business community. The first phase of any strategic plan is to do like a data dive, the research phase. And so I just wanted to share some of those statistics with you tonight. The first being the Athens County unemployment rate. So granted, this is June 2020. We'll see where this goes the next time we're able to get these numbers because everything is a bit delayed when you're dealing with Bureau of Labor statistics and census data and all of that. But it was 9.8%, which was below both national and state averages. Another interesting thing that I pulled from our report was this chart that shows that when measured in gross domestic product, Athens County's economy has grown every year since 2007. you'll see it dipped down to just 0.2% in 2018 and bounced back up in 2019. Again, something we're going to want to keep an eye on as we get the 2020 numbers due again to COVID-19. A few things. I'm not going to harp too much on this. I know you all have the presentation, and if at any point there are items or data that you want more in depth, I'm happy to share that with you after the presentation. But I just wanted to highlight some of the industry sectors in Athens County, granted this is Athens County as a whole, that have experienced significant growth and then that mid-level growth. So machinery, manufacturing, that's up 127%. A large part of that is due to the growth of Athens Mold and Machine, which I'm sure this council is very familiar with, and I will actually touch on them in just a little bit too, and some of the expansion programming that they're doing over there. Construction of buildings, just in the last year alone, we've seen Ohio Health and Ohio University's HCOM facilities build buildings. So that's where some of that is. And then, mid-level growth, TCOM, waste management, chemical manufacturing. So again, I'm happy to elaborate on this afterwards. I don't want to harp too much on it, but wanted to show you these growing industries. So I mentioned, I mentioned the data dive, and I wanted to pull some of these numbers for you all tonight. So in the bottom chart, you can see that we have made some gains in our median household income and our per capita income in the last 5 years. Modest gains, but something that we want to continue to work towards as we move forward the next 5 years. That being said, when compared to our state and national averages, obviously we are still well below those averages, and our poverty rate remains quite high. So, these are the numbers and the statistics we're looking at when we're putting together objectives for the strategic plan to see how we can, start to chip away at that poverty rate and increase our median household incomes and our per capita incomes. So I mentioned Athens Mold Machine. I just wanted to kind of spotlight them tonight as one of our business retention and expansion success stories. So as you all know, they reopened their doors back in 2017. And this year, we worked very closely with them and the city and the county and Jobs Ohio to support their expansion into an aluminum foundry. So they actually purchased an aluminum foundry out of Akron. Had they not, it was the last one in the state, and they would have had to offshore those operations to China again, which, if you recall, is the reason why we supported them so much back in 2017, so that we could reshore those manufacturing jobs here in the city of Athens. So I mentioned it not only spurred economic activity at a previously unoccupied building, but is contributing more jobs, more manufacturing jobs and capital investment to the city as well. So that'll be 30 new full-time jobs, retaining the 53 that they pledged back in 2017. Minimum project investment just under $1 million, and then an above average wage. We really love to see that at $22 an hour. We anticipate annual payroll just under $2 million, and then a sales output of just over $6 million. So part of this project included a $300,000 revitalization grant from Jobs Ohio for that ATCO building, which needs some work, as well as a $25,000 talent acquisition grant. This is to help them with workforce needs, so hiring, screening applicants, all of that. And then, of course, we also anticipate that they will continue to benefit from the redevelopment along Stimson Avenue. One more success story, kind of specific to COVID-19. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Global Cooling Sterling Ultra Cold and the role that they're playing in the vaccine distribution. So given that they use the Sterling engine technology to manufacture ultra cold temperature freezers, they are their business is really booming and taking off as a result due to COVID-19. So I like to say it's not every day that an Athens County business is featured in the New York Times. And I know it's not the city of Athens, but that's still really exciting. So I included their CEO, Dusty Tenney's quote there as well, which I won't read through, but very exciting. And I'll get more in a minute to how we're assisting them with their current expansion needs as a result of this bust that they're experiencing, or excuse me, this boom they're experiencing. But before I do that, 2020, a year like no other. So we dedicated a significant amount of time and resources to support relief and recovery programs for our businesses. The first being ensuring that those businesses that were eligible for this Jobs Ohio workforce retention loans received those. So we did bring in $500,000 for businesses and those forgivable loans. The EDC, along with several partners, worked together to advocate for a small business relief fund and asked the county to allot some of its CARES Act dollars to this program, which they did. We were very grateful for. Ended up giving over $250,000 in small business grants to about 30 businesses. And this wasn't just the City of Athens, it was Amesville, the Plains, Albany. So we did a good job of outreach. We disseminated PPE toolkits alongside the chamber this year. We conducted 2 COVID-19 relief surveys, and that was really to help us identify where businesses needed the most help. So, did they need PPE? Were they having payroll issues? Were they having supply chain issues? Did they apply for PPP EIDL? What assistance had they already received? So, those surveys really helped inform our resource guide, which I mentioned next, which was a partnership with the Visitors Bureau, the Chamber, again, all those partners coming together. And then lastly, we really encouraged businesses and pushed out the state relief program, so that Ohio DSA CARES Act program and the Bar and Restaurant Assistance Fund. We had over 50 businesses submit for the CARES Act program funding through DSA, which was great because we didn't leave any money on the table. But at the same time, it just goes to show you the continual need that is out there. And same with Bar and Restaurant Assistance Fund. We had all but a handful of businesses go after after that pot of money. And I have to give a shout out to Lori Gribble-McKnight from Workforce Development. She did a great job of, for lack of a better word, hand-holding some of the businesses that might not have been as tech savvy, may not have been great with email or online applications. She really did a great job of helping some of those businesses who wouldn't have applied for the funding to apply and get that $2,500. So back to global cooling a little bit here. So the Port Authority building project, which you're all probably somewhat familiar with, is well underway. We did the RFP process in 2020, selected Burgess and Nipel as our lead engineer for 2 speculative buildings, the one which is really no longer speculative because Global Cooling has signed a letter of intent to occupy it. It's a 100,000 square foot manufacturing building. The second was a 60,000 square foot lab building. So I've listed out the pipeline funding and the secured funding we received on this project. $2.9 million was secured from Jobs Ohio for site prep work. $500,000 from Appalachian Growth Capital, which is API, Ohio Southeast CDFI. And then $2 million in the pipeline from the Ohio DSA Rural Industrial Park Loan Program. So that site prep work is well underway, and the building design is complete, which I'm really excited. I just got it today. It's not on the version I sent you all, so here's what it will look like once completed. And again, to go back, if you're familiar with where Global Cooling is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but that building on the map is Global Cooling, and all of this land will be where the buildings are. These parcels are where the new buildings will be. So next steps for that project, we're continuing to build out that capital stack, have conversations with lenders who may be interested in participating. We're also exploring PACE financing, which for those who are not familiar is a really great financing mechanism for projects that want to do energy efficient improvements and builds. The port decided to go ahead and prioritize that 100,000 square foot building for Global Cooling and then move on to the spec building, so we have time to identify potential end users and finish building out the money that we'll need for that second building. Again, that's really to accommodate our graduating businesses from the Innovation Center. We want to make sure we keep that IP and those jobs here in Athens. I'm not going to harp too much on this. I know I don't want to take up too much time, and Paul's going to talk a little bit about DRDs after me, I believe. So these are just the 2 existing ones that were approved by the Department of Taxation. This council is obviously very familiar with DRDs and how they're used as economic development tools to rehab historic buildings, and then also that increased and assessed property value can be put back towards economic development initiatives, grants for building owners, loans for business owners, all kinds of things. So again, I won't steal your thunder, Paul. I just wanted to share that, that third DRD when the city passed the ordinance in 2018 was not approved. And so the EDCs worked closely with Paul and the city to designate that Siemens grocery store on Union Street as a historic building so it can serve as an anchor for the amended Siemens DRD, which was formerly known as the Sheltering Arms DRD. And really, we want to fast track this just so we can make sure we capture that investment from the new Ohio Health building that they are constructing, which I've highlighted here in the image. So again, I will save the rest for Paul. Broadband continues to be a huge topic. COVID-19 has obviously brought this issue to light even more and exacerbated it. Broadband is a essential utility and should be treated as such, just like utility and water and whatnot. So we continue to coordinate broadband deployment efforts with our local providers, explore state and federal funding opportunities to do that last mile fiber, which is really the key component. Advocating for better services at the state level. We've submitted several letters of support for various House and Senate bills. And I want to expand funding for broadband infrastructure. Not all have been successful, as you all probably know, but we continue to do that. And then lastly, this one I find quite important, working with partners at the local level to create a shared vision for broadband deployment and advocacy. There are so many players working on this because we all realize it is a huge issue and it hinders economic development, it hinders education, it hinders healthcare. But we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's not duplicating efforts or wasting resources. So one thing I want to point out is that the EDC is very much looking forward to working with HABCAP, who was funded, I believe, by the Athens County Foundation to support a broadband coordinator. So hopefully working with that position once hired to figure out how we can get dollars into the city, into the county for that last mile fiber. And I also just included the chart here, which you've probably seen before, that just shows what the subsidy would be to fund service to all households in the 8-county and 34-county region in Southeast Ohio. It's ridiculous. I'm not going to harp too much on this. These are just the programs and tools that the EDC administers on an annual basis. The Tax Incentive Review Council, which reviews the tax increment financing, the DRDs, you guys all know this, the enterprise zone agreements each year, the revolving loan funds, both the city and the county's revolving loan funds, and then new this year was that small business relief fund. So we continue to do those things. And again, you have access to this presentation, so you can go back and evaluate it and look at all of our partnerships. But you all know nothing happens without strong partnerships. So we've gone ahead and listed all of our strong partners here. Teamwork makes the dream work. And then lastly, 2021 and beyond. So our updated strategic plan will be actually finalized next month, and we'll roll that out to our board. Some of the objectives in that are listed here, but one thing we're looking forward to assisting with is the Ridges Advisory Committee's rehabilitation efforts for specifically buildings 2, 3, and 4 up at the Ridges. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone here that there's a huge long-term economic development play up there, right, for mixed use, residential, commercial, but housing opportunities, affordable housing, senior housing. So we definitely want to do what we can to support those efforts. Continue to work with you all, the city, to revitalize the Simpson Avenue corridor, utilizing those utilizing the opportunity zones. We really want to take a deep dive and look at site inventory for future development opportunities. I list here the Village of Albany potential opportunities out there, as they do have the last of our remaining flat land. But going beyond that and looking at, what's the cost and what's the scope of work to get these sites ready for development, shovel ready, as economic developers like to say. Possibly exploring the creation of a community urban redevelopment corporation. So who knows, maybe I'll be back in a few months talking to you guys about that. But, it's structured similarly to TIF, to tax increment financing, but is aimed at addressing blighted city properties. Again, securing funding for last mile fiber. And then this is an important one, coordinating improved communication between our businesses and our educational institutions. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what we're training our students and our future workforce for and what the needs actually are. And so the EDC is trying to work towards how we can strengthen that communication and bridge those workforce needs and those gaps. So that's really all I have. I hope I didn't take up too much time. The last thing I want to say is that you'll see Kate Perini's name listed here. She is our new project specialist. She just joined us in December, and I'm very thrilled to have her on board. She's doing a great job. So this is our team, myself and Kate for now. So tiny office, but doing a lot. So that's all I have for you. Open to questions.
Great. Thank you. Are there any questions? I can't see everybody. Mayor?
Molly, you mentioned the Small Business Relief Fund and the amount that has been expensed out already. Is there still money available for that for any businesses that may not know about it? I'm seeing you shake your head. So. Yeah,
unfortunately, no, because the county has allotted all of their money to various things. They did grant us up to $500,000. That didn't necessarily mean we were going to get all $500,000. So unfortunately, no. That pot of funding is no longer available, but I've been encouraging businesses to, and we will do direct outreach too, but encouraging businesses to stay in touch because you never know. I know this most recent round of funding didn't allot anything to municipalities, which is how we propped up the program through the County CARES Act dollars, but you never know. And we will continue to advocate for similar programs as we move forward and as funds become available.
Thank you. Other questions? Chris?
Yes, a question about the Athens Molded Machine and they're moving into the space in ATCO. Have they moved in or is that?
So Samuel, who we work with over at Athens Molded Machine, his office has been in there pre-COVID. Like I think back in February, he moved in and they've moved in some of the offices. The Revite, the renovations and all of that they receive funding for has not begun yet. And they have that's a 3-year project and they have to sign and confirm that they are going to use that money by the end of the month.
Okay,
great.
Thank you.
Other people have to wave at me if they want to ask a question because I don't have my gallery up. Okay, any other questions? Okay.
I'm sorry, Member Fall, I have one.
Yes.
And Molly Fitzgerald, thank you so much for putting this together and presenting tonight. The question I had was about the company that you said that we probably have never heard about, this German valve company. Is that the machine shop that's located up in Buchtel?
It is not. So it's actually located on Harold Avenue. So if you continue Harold, right? Yeah, Harold. If you continue to kind of round that bend right there, it's that kind of warehousing looking building right there on the corner.
Okay.
And they, this just goes to show you the value of business retention and expansion meetings. We had met with them over a year ago and just weren't really able to help them because there weren't programs that fit for the size of the company that they are. So that's why it's so critical for us to stay in touch. And as these new programs become available, have a record of being like, oh, we should go back to them and see if it's a good fit and a good time for them to have a project.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beth?
Molly, thank you so much. It looks like you get an incredible amount of important work done for having been the only person in the office until December. So congratulations to you. I have a quick follow-up on Member Katsis's question. That mysterious business on Harold Avenue, how many people do they employ currently? Do you know?
I believe four
Okay.
currently.
All right.
And they, like their parent company over in Germany, employs a lot more people. But yeah, currently I think they're at 4. And the project that they committed to, I think at least 2 new jobs. So
50,
hopefully by.
Okay. All right. That's good. And then I was also curious about I believe you said it was 100,000 square foot building that Global Sterling Ultra Cold is going to expand into. I could see how they would want that space today with the incredible demand they're facing for those ultra cold energy efficient freezers for vaccines. But Do you happen to know, do they have a plan for post-COVID vaccines? I mean, are they still going to need all that space?
So I will say that even before the pandemic hit, we were planning this project. So they were at max capacity, which now they're busting at the seams.
Yeah.
They needed the extra space, and we're anticipating the growth even pre-COVID.
Okay.
So now, this is not set in stone. I don't have any letters of commitment to occupy both buildings, but it wouldn't surprise me if either they continue to lease their current building too, or at least help us market that to one of their suppliers to help with their process and efficiencies.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Great. Any other questions? Let me cruise through all these people. Okay. Well, thank you, Molly. I'm very encouraged by the amount of programs and stuff that's going on, even with COVID-19. So it's very encouraging, and thank you for the presentation and everything. Do any further questions from the audience or anything? So, okay. Thank you, Molly.
Well, I guess I have to stop sharing my screen. Huh? There we go.
Okay.
Thank you all very much for your continued support.
Thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda is another presentation about what was actually discussed a little bit by Molly at DRD, which we've already touched on at one point because we did identify Siemens as a historic building in Athens. And so this is another process on that development that we're doing in that area. So, Paul, thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Fall. Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. To what Molly just talked about with the Economic Development Council, as many of you recall, most of you, I think maybe minus at least 5 members of council were on City Council back in 2018. At that time, council made some actions to approve and establish 3 downtown redevelopment districts in the city of Athens, as well as approve a economic development plan that was drafted by a consulting firm called the Montrose Group out of Columbus. That they drafted this plan to support the downtown the DRDs. There was 3 DRDs that council approved. As the process went through the paperwork machinations with the state of Ohio, one of those DRDs was rejected by the state. I think it was larger than the DRD can be no bigger than 10 acres. And I believe once everything penciled out on that one, it was actually upwards of 13 or 14 acres. And the state just rejected it and said you can't modify that application. You need to resubmit at a later date with a new DRD. And so once all of that went through with the state, mid-year last year, we started working towards reestablishing that downtown redevelopment district in order to capture economic development revenues that could be generated in that area. As part of that, City Council last year, of course, Chris already mentioned it, but you supported establishing Siemens Grocery on Union Street as a locally designated historic property. The Seaman family is very excited about that. If anybody has talked with them, I can confirm that. And one of the strategies we were looking at as an anchor because a downtown redevelopment district requires under state legislation to have at a minimum a locally designated historic property in it in order to help support it. And so part of that process, we established the Siemens Historic.
Oops.
I was in a different Zoom meeting recently in which we all turned our cameras off and then that person's feed got unstuck. I don't know if that's worth trying.
Sure.
Okay.
There he is.
I'll be darned.
Are you all? I'm sorry about that. My internet just crashed on me really quick.
Yeah, you froze for quite a while there, so I don't know if you're still talking or not.
Go back a few
Still talking.
sentences.
I think that happened at a planning commission meeting a few months back too. My apologies for that. I'll blame Spectrum for that. I don't have control over my coverage some days.
Neither do they.
Council established the Siemens the Siemens as an anchor. What we're trying to do now is reestablish that downtown redevelopment district. There's two parts to that City Council needs to be aware of, as far as at least by my interpretation. One of which is that a new DRD has to be established by legislative act. And secondly, because the economic development plan that was approved back in 2018, which is also a state requirement for the DRDs, that plan did not mention this specific DRD. We revised that plan to incorporate this new Union Street DRD into it. And so I know Clerk of Council Debbie Walker, I apologize. I sent these to Debbie at about 4:00 this afternoon, and I apologize to everybody on City Council for the slow getting these documents out to you. However, my understanding of the process is that prior to adoption of a new DRD under state law, a public hearing must be held with 30 days public notice to the property owners. And then after that public hearing is held, the legislation cannot be finalized until 30 days after that public hearing. And so we have at least a 60-day time period before it could even go to a third reading under Ohio Revised Code. So we can't accelerate this process. It'll actually be a little bit slower than a typical 3-reading ordinance. I think you have all the documents. What I'm hoping to do, and I have draft language for an ordinance, as well as the draft letters to property owners and draft public notice to be put in a newspaper, et cetera. But what I want to do, first of all, of course, is if any members of council have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. I think Molly Fitzgerald is still on the line as well. Molly can help. It should be noted, of course, when a lot of this was going through in 2018, Sarah Mars Maxfield was the executive director of the EDC. I don't think Molly was even with the EDC at that time. And so Molly and I have been trying to figure this out more or less on our own. And it took us a little bit of time to get up to speed on all of the requirements under the ORC. But I think we're ready to go now, and our timing is good to get this wrapped up in the first or second quarter of 2021. Does anybody have any questions?
No.
Yeah. Beth?
I must say I didn't have a chance to see these documents between 4:00 and now. I had prepared for the meeting earlier. Could you remind the longer term City Council members, and perhaps let Arian and I know, does this particular DRD include the whole uptown area, or is it only a component of it, or what is included in the proposal?
Sure. Let me bring up. I'll share my screen, and so you can see a map of this area. Can everybody see that? This is it's just under 10 acres. Councilmember Claude Felter. They're called, under Ohio Revised Code, they're called downtown redevelopment districts. However, they can be applied anywhere within a municipality.
Okay.
There's two real keys to it. It cannot be bigger than 10 acres. All of the parcels in it must be contiguous with each other and continuous with each other. And it has to have, at a minimum, a locally designated historic property. So again, they're called downtown redevelopment districts, but they can be used in uptown areas or west sides of communities. So this area is roughly 9.6 or 9.7 acres. It incorporates the Siemens grocery store area right here, as well as the gas station, the Dials Hearing Center, and what's currently an urgent care or an express care by Ohio Health. And as you're all aware, that there's a new Ohio Health building being constructed right there. The DRD, it functions very similar to a TIF, tax increment financing strategy, where for a period of time after it is established, I believe under this one, it would be for 10 years. A portion of the real estate taxes that are collected within this district on improved value is then kept to be reinvested into the district to support infrastructure. It can be support landscaping. The nice thing about a DRD is they're really flexible with what you can do. TIFs have a lot more regulations around them, but within a TIF, for example, if Siemens Grocery or somebody, if they wanted to do, it could be provide for a historic preservation expert to give them guidance on how to do renovations to their building. So it could help offset the cost for design work for an architect. We could invest in landscaping along Union Street, signage along Union Street to help to beautify the area. If new infrastructure is needed, new public infrastructure, the DRD monies can be utilized to offset the cost of public infrastructure in an area, with the hope, of course, of generating and getting new economic development to occur in them. This area is one of the few sites, especially on the west side of Athens, that has a lot of potential for growth. We know from Ohio Health that new building that's under construction right now, it was designed to actually for the potential of having an addition to it that could double the size of it. And so, if that building, when it comes online, the improved value in the real estate taxes, that would be 70% of that would be captured to remain in here. And if they were to build that addition, the same thing, we'd be able to capture 70% of the increased property value taxes to be maintained within that district for public infrastructure, design elements, anything like that.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul.
And I do apologize for the late notice on the documents. I totally understand that between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock, you're very busy.
That's quite all right. Thank you for this information.
Yeah.
Mayor?
I think it's worth mentioning, as Paul indicated, we did have 3 DRDs. You know, I was deep in the trenches on all 3 of those back in 2017. And after we learned about DRDs at an OML conference, but one of the chief reasons that we were unsuccessful with that 3rd DRD, because of its size, it's worth telling council, letting everyone know what happened. There was little guidance in terms of what can be used to basically kind of connect a DRD to create a DRD. And early on, our understanding was that streets do not count as a developable piece of property. We did challenge that when we found out that we were not awarded. We actually weren't awarded 2 DRDs and challenged on the 3rd one. We were successful in getting the 234 West Washington DRD through because it was one minor change. It was a little bit heavier lift with the depot DRD, but we did get that one approved as well. But this one, the reason, as Paul indicated, that the acreage was as large as it was because I believe it was DAS said, no, that is, you're counting the street and you can't do that to capture a historic building, which was the downtown historic district. The Follets building was included in there, even though that's a building that certainly could be repurposed and developed again. So I just wanted to make that clear to council and anyone watching that was the reason. We did challenge. We felt we had good grounds to challenge that 3rd DRD, but this DRD will be equally valuable because, as some of you may be aware, with the new build that is going on with Ohio Health, they also planned that campus to where they could build a second 30,000 square foot building down on that property. They aren't doing that right now, but they do have the ability to do that in the future, which would continue to add to this DRD for improvements.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Medley?
Thank you, Member Fall, and thank you, Paul, for being here, walking us through that. Also appreciated your presentation, Molly. Now, the footprint for the DRD, is that the exact same footprint as the Historic Preservation District? It is not.
No, the only thing that's in the Siemens building was the only thing that's included in the historic. The designation was for the Siemens Grocery. The requirements within a DRD is that it has to have a historic anchor building, and so in this situation, Siemens is on the one that Mayor Patterson mentioned, the one on West Washington Street. I believe that one, the anchor is the Booker T. Washington home. I may be mistaken there, Mayor. Or is it?
No, it's It's a cider house. Cider house is a registered historic building.
Okay.
Thank you, and appreciate administration's keeping at this site and trying again and getting this DRD established on the west side.
Thank you.
Other questions? Member Kotsas?
Yes, thank you. And Planner Paul, I believe you touched on it a little bit, but when I looked at the map today, I said, boy, I know that there's a building there somewhere and I don't see it on the map. So it looks like when the gain is not registered until the taxes have been readjusted. Is that correct? Because when I was like, okay, they're building a building right now, then we designate this on top of it. I was worried that we may not, that we might be too late.
Yeah, my understanding is that the taxes would not be assessed until 2022. Okay. The accounting or the assessment would be made then, and so as long as we're establishing the DRD in year 2021, we are in good shape.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Other questions? You scroll through here, all our people. Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. I know this particular site's really in an excellent position to be able to become a real community anchor too, especially if some of the development is for pedestrian oriented landscaping and stuff. That particular parking lot has its own logic and its own rationale for doing the things that it does. So it would be good if it kind of became more safe. So thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. Oh, Member Reisner?
Yeah, your question just gave me a question. When the campus of Ohio Health is completed, do you know if they have any plans to connect it with their parking lot across that swale? Right now, the only entrance would be off of Union. It would make sense if they were getting connected off of Hospital Drive or whatever they call that street.
Oh, I see where you.
In other words, the back of the property. Does that have any impact on taxes?
Councilman Reisner, to my knowledge or to my recollection, I apologize, it's been a while since that project went through the Planning Commission. I believe that there will be an entrance off of to the south to connect it with the parking lot area and the driveway areas of Ohio Health. Yeah. There was also conversation about possibly down the road, kind of either closing off the Union Street entrance and the Express Care Urgent Care building. That's been around for a long time, and I think if anybody's been in there, I know a lot of people were in there about a year ago when the flu was going around Athens County. It's a very small space, and it's probably lost. They probably need a bigger site for their Express Care program.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It wouldn't surprise me if that's torn down within the next 5 or 10 years.
Great. Other questions? Great. Well, thank you, Paul. We will start these moving through and all the requisite public information to go out so that we can have those public hearings. Right.
And thank you. And if it's okay, I'd like to be able to reach out to Debbie Walker and coordinate with her about helping with the public notices and all of that.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie.
Okay. Next on my agenda are 3 particular items, but I'm going to talk about all of them at once. And we have talked about this before, and it's the Title IX, Title 37, and Title I, which is our basic landscaping ordinances and language in the various codes. As a group of citizens, as I've told you before, came forward to ask me to help update. So we did some research, found a lot of models and the current best management practices for the various issues that are confronting all communities across the United States. We've been told over and over by our planning process and all the public meetings and hearings and surveys through not only our update of our comprehensive plan, but also our sustainability plan that's out there, and the county plan that has shown us over and over and over that people in this area want to move more towards resiliency, sustainability for everything that we do in the city. Landscapes, so we know, really has a huge impact on our environment. We talked about stormwater management and passed fees for that. Why? Because it helps to keep our environment clean and safe. It helps to reduce flooding. Landscape ordinances are the same sort of thing. Why do we want to do that? Well, I would argue that a lot of what we do when we update our comprehensive and sustainability plans and implement them is to ensure that we have our community to become sustainable and resilient, and to make sure our community has safety for all community members, and to make sure that there's equity and environmental justice across all parts of our community. So I just wanted to say that we do that every day when we pass ordinances and make regulations, so that we help to mitigate climate change, because we know climate change tends to impact people of lower economic levels than other people, because they tend to live in marginal places. Our area, a lot of people who cannot move live in flood zones. So this is why we do these sort of ordinances and language. And so I just wanted to say that because of all the stuff that's gone down over the last couple weeks. And I just want to say that we're here to go and push what our citizens have told us to push, our community. So being that, you've seen the changes on 37. Basically, it's updating with new definitions put into the ordinances, requiring certain prohibitions against certain types of landscaping materials being used in commercial properties and those sort of things. It has a second section that is new, which is the green infrastructure section. That has 3 programs put into it for the first time, because it is a new section, including Celebration Tree program that the city will start, a tree bank process and ownership of tree banks and the process that you have to go through and how much it will cost. And the third one is our pollinator-friendly front yard registration program, which we should find an acronym for. So I've worked with the citizens in their original part, and then I've worked with other citizens to fine tune what we've put together for this evening. So it's pretty straightforward. Personally, I'm very excited to be able to get this going, because it's so important to be able to reduce the amount of invasive species that are in our neighborhood, because they tend to hurt people because they take over gardens and then you can't grow anything. Noxious weeds can be poisonous for animals. We need to be able to identify those and have people know about them, and so that our whole environment becomes more sustainable and more resilient to the pressures that will be on it through climate change. So this is also fulfillment of one of the climate change emergency programs that I wanted to do for last year, but this year. Questions? Okay, Ms. Medley?
Sorry, I'm back in the old office, so I got to figure out how to work this computer. Thank you, Member Fall. Certainly in support of all the new programs. They do all the things that you explained that they will do. The intentions are good and fit in our overall goals with the city. The only concern that I have is with the exemptions listed in Title IX. Mm-hmm. The properties that are registered with the pollinator-friendly yard registration program, they are exempt from the grass and weed height restrictions.
Yep.
And I assume that's because of their nature of being a pollinator-friendly garden. There are, in other cases, if you're not within that program, for those who are unaware, a height restriction of 8 inches.
The height restriction, it used to read, the original height restriction, that all plants that were neither shrubs or trees had to be less than 8 inches. So that meant perennials, flowers, because it was so broadly written. It's been tightened up so that it identifies the things that are most complained about to like code of grasses and various grass-like species. So that helps to tighten that up, because as it is now, if you have something more than 8 inches tall, that's like a black-eyed Susan or something, that would, in our ordinance now, in the language that we have now, that's theoretically not appropriate, not legal.
Right. This restricts it to this. The exemption is from grass and weed height restrictions.
Right. So there's also put in language about upkeep and tidy and litter-free yards that have been strengthened also. That was something that David Riggs put in so that it's easier to enforce, because it's very difficult to enforce right now.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's an unintended consequence if their grass is allowed to be taller than 8 inches. There's a reason why grass is restricted on its height, and
mostly it's because grasses, turf grasses especially, this is written in a very broad way about turf grasses and lawns. That's when they start seeding. And so you want to get it mowed before it starts seeding, because it can cause problems, for the sort of things. Because then it gets very rank and it looks very messy. And then, it can be much harder to be able to mow and such.
Yes, I understand all that. And when folks are exempt from that, that could be problematic. And I don't know how you manage that. I'm just bringing it up as a potential concern.
This is something that I worked with some people with afterwards, after one of the other time I came forward with the language. And it's not necessarily the 8 inches, it's more the rank and messy quality that presents. And so I worked with the community people and then with David Riggs to look at how it would be the easiest way to be able to enforce what people want right now in the ordinance language. And so, because right now it's difficult to enforce.
Councilmember Fall, I think Mr. Swank has a comment he'd like to make. It might be about this. Mr.
Hello?
Swank? Yep.
Yes. Yes, Alan Swank, 40 Townsend Place here in Athens. I'd like to pick up on this exemption and clarify some things for not only council, but the general public. The AFINA Executive Board was one of these groups that met, and originally the grass height was going to be 10 inches. We thought that was way too high, because by the time code goes through the process of citing someone, all that, 10 turns to 12 and 12 turns to 14. But the exemption, we were very firm in this, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not FINA, but I was at the FINA meeting. We were very strong on this 8-inch thing. For the cost of 2 plants and a bird bath, somebody can become a certified or whatever, I'm lost for words here, a pollinator yard. 2 plants and a bird bath. Pay $25, and you can let your grass grow 6 feet high with this exemption. In other words, for $25, 2 plants and a bird bath, someone could essentially go the entire summer and never have to mow their grass. One of our members said, you know what? If I wanted to live next to a prairie, I would move to Nebraska. I feel very strongly that this exemption is opening up a can of worms and needs to be stricken from the legislation. All properties, whether you're a certified pollinator property or someone who's just maintaining a nice yard should be treated equally. We have, at my house here, probably the largest or second largest garden on the far east side. It's full of pollinators. Yet we want to keep a nice trim lawn. If we wanted to, because we have all these pollinators that could pay the $25, we would never have to mow their grass. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen. In fact, there are people right now using the city as their lawn service. They pay it twice a year, and that's all they have to pay. So I feel very strongly that this needs to be struck from the ordinance. Everything else looks pretty good. More pollinators, the better. But letting grass grow all summer is not in the best interest of the city, its residents, or the health and safety of the children that play in these yards. Thank you.
Other questions? Yep. Mr. Casas?
I believe Member Clodfelter had her hand up first.
Okay.
That's very chivalrous of you. Thank you, Member Katsas. I wanted to actually applaud you for setting up, for making the tree bank more active. I think that is a real asset to the city. And if we use it actively, it could really help the environment and get more trees planted. I also really, really like the idea of the celebration tree and the chance for people to pay $100 to get a celebration tree in recognition of some important aspect of their lives. So many places have memorial trees, which can be absolutely lovely and really meaningful for people. But I've always wondered why people only get trees if someone has passed away. But the idea of this celebration tree could allow people to put up a tree if a baby's born, or they get married, or for retirement, or graduation, which could be really big in this community. And I really like the idea, and I will be interested in seeing how the city decides to promote that. And I hope that the promotional efforts will include reaching out to the parents of Ohio University students.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Katsas?
Yes, thank you. And that was a great segue, because I wasn't going to talk about the pollinator gardens, but I was going to mention being on the shade tree committee. I just wanted to make sure that this is already. We have our meeting next Thursday, and so I didn't know if it'd be possible to have that legislation in front of David Ingram prior to that, or else
Right.
we'll just have to wait another month.
They've reviewed
Okay.
in the original, and they can. Most of it has not been changed. Most the pollinator issues was the one that most people identified. And I think that between what the administration has put forward and the other issues that will be addressed when we finish the various types of lists that we will have and the actual requirements that you will need in order to be a pollinator garden will be more clear to people, and it will be clearer that there's probably not as much issue between having messy, untidy gardens around the neighborhoods anymore than if a pollinator program went through. So, thank you.
Perfect.
Questions? Other questions? Did that answer?
Yes, it does. And I just wanted to mention that on the first time through that the understanding that I had from the Shade Tree Commission that was these changes that you were proposing was very, very favorable to the group. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? Ms. Grace?
Thank you, Member Fall. I just wanted to say thanks for all the time and effort and research that you put into this, because having landscape ordinances and tree banks and celebration tree programs, things that the community can be a part of to improve the natural and local native plants in our community has really long-term benefits. And so thank you for the work and research you put into it.
Great. Well, I want to say thank you very much, because the code enforcement has been huge, and working with David Riggs and Lisa Eliason really was instrumental in being able to identify all the issues that are out there and try to update and address those issues in the new ordinance. So Okay. So I will be making sure that all those are put out and all of the things are spelled right and everything, because I know that there's already a spelling error. And then get with Debbie to see what kind of timeline. But so thank you. And that ends my meeting, my committee meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Fall. We'll move on to the Transportation Committee, and that's chaired by Councilmember Kotsis and joined by Councilmembers Crowell and Clodfelter.
President Nisley, thank you. And tonight, council members, if we've been here a couple years, we understand that there's an ebb and a flow, a seasonality of our ordinances throughout the year. And now is the time to start talking about street closures for our spring and summer and fall. And so it doesn't necessarily seem like the right time to be speaking about this, but we can't put this off. We have to anticipate that things will be different at some point. That doesn't mean that what we do tonight means that we're going to see events, all events this summer. But I did want to. We need to plan for them now, and then make adjustments as time goes on, just like we've done for the last 9 or 10 months. So as we remember back to last year, we had we changed it up a little bit and just had one ordinance that covered everything, providing a better calendar for businesses to kind of see what the summer season looks like. We're doing the same thing again this year. And Andrew Chicky is here this evening to speak to it. So, Andrew, thank you so much for coming this evening.
Good evening, Council. The lively discussion this evening, I feel bad following up all of that great stuff, but work must continue. And this is important as well. We're hopeful that we'll have at least some events this summer. Last year, we put a lot of work into changing how we would do planning for events, and then that kind of went out the window. But the framework still is there, and we're building off of that framework. And that's part of the point of this evening, is to build on the framework and not necessarily saying that all of the events that might be listed, or even any of the events that might be listed, are a go. It's primarily to make sure that we have the framework that if things open up later in the summer into the fall, that we have that together. And we can assist those organizations and businesses and the uptown area with quickly planning. And anybody that's done event planning or program planning knows that the work that happens for those begins, the day after the event that you just held happened. So it takes months and sometimes years to pull off some of these things. And we want to be helpful and assisting those different events with getting off the ground quickly if we're able to. Typically, we have to pass 3 separate distinct ordinances for most events because we have to temporarily change some of the city code. So vending is an example, the noise ordinance is an example, in addition to allowing for the closure. So there's a lot of pieces that happen for even one event to take place through council action. We already know that there are a number of events that are canceled, or we've talked to that have indicated that they're going to hold something different. But at the same time, we also know that the event calendar is very competitive. And when one opens up, other things take its place. So in part, the intent is that we have placeholders for our long-standing events that we're cognizant of the general calendar that happens and the ebbs and flows of the seasons. We also know that we do not want to contribute to the spread of COVID through approving any ordinance for a special event or a closure. And the intent here is to allow the mayor and the service safety director some latitude to determine just because you have approval for the street closure does not give you approval to host the event or hold the event. That we have language that enacts guidelines to again help event organizers plan ahead. And, we don't know what it's going to look like in 3 months. We don't know what it's going to look like in 6 months. And we saw the results of that last year, and we're anticipating that to continue. Again, it's about having the pieces in place. We also know that not all closures equal large numbers of people. Some closures, such as the Plains Lions Club does 3 different cruise-ins each year. It's not necessarily drawing big numbers. We can work with them to spread that event out further instead of concentrating it onto one street and having it really focused and tightly packed. So we're open to working with all of those groups. We want to have the structure in place to be able to do so is the idea. We also are aware that, the framework that we do year in and year out is something that we use in the future. So the consistency is really important to continue, even though it seems like this is an off year, to make sure that we have the framework in place, because we build off of that and we figure out what works and what doesn't work. And again, it's about assisting these events. We're hopeful going into 2022 that as things open up, that we're going to have some really great celebrations. Athens knows how to celebrate and come together as a community, and we want to be able to do that in a safe and respectful and in a manner that hits all the marks and is a really good, well-planned event. And we want to, as a city, as an administration, as a municipality, that we're doing all we can to make it reflective of the community that we are. So that's kind of in a nutshell the intent here. There are some placeholder events that were sent out with the draft. Those are subject to change. We know that. I know that I don't want to speak for the mayor, but he had indicated earlier today that he had spoken to some event organizers that I spoke to a week before, and they have, they're reconsidering how they're going to do things. So we know that it's a moving target, but we also know that we have to have something to aim for.
Okay, and thank you. And so the list that we have in the one ordinance of the events that are present, and this is going back to our conversation a few weeks ago. We're not going to look at new events this year. Is that still correct?
That's correct. The intent of this particular legislation would be for long-standing events that we have year in and year out that we use placeholders for. Typically, what the intent is that new events come before council individually so that they can be vetted. But we know on the list of events, and for example, the JPAC, Joint Police Advisory Council Barbecue, that happens year in and year out. The structure is identical year in and year out. We kind of put it together knowing that there aren't going to be many dramatic changes that would require a large amount of consideration from City Council. So that's kind of what we're building off of from last year, where we started making a list and coming up with a calendar to say, okay, we don't need to have 15 pieces of legislation for 15 different events, that the best use of council's time is to consider new legislation and new proposals coming forward. So that's in a nutshell what the intent is here. Same thing with Brew Week. They went virtual last year. There are likely to be changes coming into 2021. We know that, but at the same time, we want to have the structure in place, knowing that when and if they are able to host something in person, that we have it ready for them and they can fast track their planning process.
Okay, perfect. And currently, right now, is that list fairly complete, or is there a chance that we might be amending this as the reads go through?
It's possible that we amend it. I'm talking to event organizers weekly, as is the mayor, and I'm sure the chief is getting feedback as well. So again, we're in January right now. Some event organizers are just now picking up the ball and thinking about what it's going to look like. So we're helping to guide that conversation as well, because there's a lot of questions that event organizers have related to health restrictions, mask ordinances, and that kind of thing. And we want to help them make an informed decision. So it's likely that the list you have will alter, but at the same time, those later season ones, especially, Ayuba Trick or Treat, for example, that we have on the list, that's pretty far in advance. That's, end of October. We want to work on creative solutions going into this as well to help, have those events safely if we can.
Perfect. Thank you. Do we have any questions from other council members at this time? Mayor? Andrew, I think you did a really good job. Nobody has any questions. You answered everything. So, thank you very much. So we'll start to see the reads come through. 3 different ordinances: one for the events, one for our noise ordinance, and one for vending when it's necessary. And we'll just start working through this and continuing to talk about it. Past that, we are done with Transportation Committee. Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll move on to Finance and Personnel Committee, and that's chaired by Councilmember Crowell, joined by Councilmembers Reisner, Katsas, and Smedley.
Thank you, President Isley. We have a number of items on our agenda this evening, starting with the salary reduction pickup plan. Basically, the City of Athens collects their employees' share of their contribution to the pension and then submits it to OPERS along with the City of Athens as employer share. And I believe the issue here is we need to amend to put an effective date on this pension payout. So that will be coming up next Monday. Any questions? Okay. The next item is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. This is the FFCRA. It is expiring, and we would like to request to extend this. I am not sure if this can be done by the mayor's office or if it requires legislation.
And I think it may require legislation, which is why we're having it for the discussion tonight.
Okay. We had discussed this at the mayor auditor's meeting, but I believe Mr. Lucas and Ms. Eliason were going to see if we needed additional legislation for this. But yes, Mayor, do you want to speak to that?
I do. To kind of echo what President Isley was saying, is that since we are extending this, that's why we are in need of council action to authorize an extension of this.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Member Reisner.
Any idea how many of our employees within the city are taking advantage of this?
There's been a number who have. Member Reisner, those who had to quarantine, high potential exposure, that they would take advantage of this program, or those who had to actually isolate. But I think isolations, you fell under your sick time. But there's been a few members of employees in the City of Athens that have taken advantage of this.
Okay, so it's definitely worthwhile extending it then.
There is something I'd like council to make note of, if I may, President Isley and Member Crowell, is the reasons for leave. There was a change in that section to where, in conversations with the law director, it was believed that that was the best place to put this. Actually, I take that back. It's the employee agreement on page 2 of this document. At the very bottom, you'll see vaccination information, because we feel that that's important to be in here. to where someone will be eligible if they have received the vaccination or if they have not received it, but will as soon as it comes available. Now is probably a good time just to mention on those 2 points that we have through the Athens City County Health Department last Thursday had a number of police officers and firefighters who were offered the vaccine and who received the vaccine. We also had many members employees at the wastewater treatment plant because they obviously are exposed to the antigen down there or the virus down there with what they do. And then the code enforcement office was able to go down and receive vaccinations. There is a third box on here that one would check, and that is basically stating I will not receive the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccination. And then there's a in parentheses that if this box is checked, I understand that I will not receive the benefits provided by this document. I feel strongly that if the vaccine is being offered to city employees, that they get the vaccine. It is optional. I hate using that word, but I can't mandate or I won't mandate that our employees go down and get vaccinated. We have 4 union contracts, and it would require a lot of work in that realm. But again, I feel strongly that when we are offered the vaccine by the Athens City County Health Department, that we get vaccinated. As that rolls forward and more clinics open up, that I will continue to push for our employees to get vaccinated. So really, there's no reason to not get vaccinated unless there's a life-threatening condition that could preclude you from receiving the vaccine because of a pre-existing health condition of some type. But I just, again, wanted to alert council to those clauses under the employee agreement of this form.
I think that makes sense, Mayor. Thank you for that. Okay, seeing no other hands, I will move on to appropriations and transfers. There are quite a few, as you can imagine, here in our first meeting in January, and I will go through these slowly. Please do raise your hand. I'll try to keep my eyes open for anybody who wants to chime in. Again, you may remember appropriations in 2020 for our internal services budget to cover administrative costs. We have a new appropriation coming up next week of $106,523 over several departments. And this is, as the auditor's office says, the final calculation to the 2021 internal services budget to cover those administrative costs. We will be appropriating or recommending appropriation of $1,000 to the cemetery fund for refunds. We will be offering an appropriation of $12,000 to the community center to pay real estate taxes. There is some unspent grant money that was returned from HAPCAP, and that is the amount of $6,889.41, and that will be transferred into the general fund to cover payroll for our public safety forces. The city also received approximately $1.1 million in a Bureau of Workers' Compensation dividend, and it is recommended that that money be appropriated as follows. Appropriate $252,000 to the general fund fire to purchase SCBA devices for the fire department. Those are self-contained breathing apparatus. Chief has been looking for those for some time, and this will cover that cost. Those funds will also be appropriated in the amount of $570,091 to the general fund to cover the BWC premiums, CPR training, medical box payments, the HR medical incentive program, and individual department health and safety needs. And then finally, from that BWC payment, appropriation will be another $325,000 will go into the general fund to purchase 2 generators, one for the city building and one for the law administration building. Okay, moving on. We will be offering a, yes, President Nisley.
Just a technical question on the generators. I realize that the self-contained breathing apparatus we may not be able to do bids on. Are we doing bids? Are we going through Department of Administrative Services for the generators?
We'll check on that, Member Nisley, President Nisley, in terms of, whether we can. Andrew's got his hand raised. Andrew, jump in.
Yeah, so we're fast tracking that right now. We're getting an updated quote. The last time we got quotes for the generators was 2017. We're working with a couple of different electrician companies locally to see what those changes in price look like. It's possible that it could be 1 generator for both buildings or 2 generators. It really depends. We're going to get a couple of different quotes to figure that out first. We are looking into the possibility of joint purchasing, but we haven't got the research in yet to find out if we have some qualifying companies within the region that could do that type of work.
Okay, thank you.
Let me add to that real quick. We did get a price quote back in 2017 from Claypool on what the cost would be for gas, natural gas operated generators versus diesel generators. We currently have a diesel generator. The price is significantly different. Very expensive to get the gas generators, and for the amount of run time that we actually put on a backup generator for the law building and the city building, the most recent and probably the longest outage that we had, if you may all recall, is when a telephone pole, a utility pole came down in secure parking lot and knocked out our power, which really demonstrated our vulnerability, but it was what it was. And we were without power to the buildings for 3 days. So this is a safety feature. We are really looking at 1 generator as opposed to 2 natural gas generators because of cost and because the amount of runtime that you put on a backup generator pales in comparison with carbon output when you have a generator versus, say, a semi truck on the highways or something like that. So it was a little over $100,000 difference between those quotes for the diesel generator. But those are 2017 dollars, so keep that in mind. When we get the quotes, we will continue to keep council abreast, the path that we're going to take moving forward. But at this point, we feel having a single generator that will completely power both the city building and the law building, police department is the better of the 2 paths moving forward.
Member Katsas.
Yes, and I was just kind of curious, just knowing how tight space is in the uptown area. Going back to those conversations in 2017, and I will mention, back then I wasn't very keen on this idea, but I would say that it's different now. Let's talk. So my question just more is just out of curiosity, where does this generator live in a tight uptown space?
It'll likely go on the same footprint to where the current generator is, Member Katsas, which is right over by the Sallyport, by the law building. So it's already there. Hopefully it would be a unit that's roughly that same size. One of the modifications that I know that would have to happen is that there would have to be an exhaust stack that goes up and clears the rooftop of the law building. So, the The only real dimensional change is going to be vertical as opposed to horizontal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on. Discussing the previously the internal services budgets. There were a number of departments where the budgets were overcalculated. So there will be a recommendation to reduce appropriations in 4 departments by a total of $72,602 due to those overcalculations. Moving on, there will be a recommendation to reduce the general fund police by $40,000 in supplies and professional services, and increase by that same amount in their personnel services. And then looking at CARES Act funding, we will be offering the transfer of $135,011.28 from the CARES Act fund into the general fund. And that is that money that left over from HAPCAP, the $6,889, added to the already appropriated $128,000, but not yet transferred. So that will be going into the general fund. And finally, we were looking at a transfer of $175,066 from the parking garage fund to the parking garage debt fund. Okay, and that ends the appropriations and transfers portion of our delightful evening. Moving on, we have the transient guest tax revenue item on our agenda. And this will require next week an emergency clause and a suspension of the rules. We do have a 3-year agreement with the Athens County Convention and Visitors Bureau. And it was discovered that this expired, this piece of a 2017 ordinance expired in December, which is why we will do this under emergency and suspension of the rules next week, as we should have had this in place as of January 1st. But basically, this authorizes the auditor to put 50% of the transient guest tax revenue into the tourism fund. And 50%, that's what this says, that the auditor is authorized to deposit this for the period from January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2024. And that's just to clean up that final piece of the new contract with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Yes, Member Katsas.
And forgive me, I was listening and maybe I didn't quite catch it. Did you say what the mix is? What our splits are for the TGT tax?
Yeah, it's 50-50, and that is required by the Ohio Revised Code. So 50% goes into our fund and 50% goes to the Athens County Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Mm-hmm. And then a percentage of our 50 usually funds a percentage of the Economic Development Council. Is that correct? No. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that comes from the general fund, Peter. So I guess you could think of it that way. But that used to be the case, to where we were sending a smaller percentage to the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and then some was kept to pay our membership with the EDC. So there's not a further split of what comes out of our 50% from the city.
Yeah, I think I remember that conversation too. So yeah, no, I've unconfused myself. Thank you.
And it's worth mentioning, in a non-COVID timeframe, the EDC was receiving roughly $215,000 to $230,000, somewhere in that range, which was half of what we were getting, which was, in excess of $400,000. 2020 will not see that, and we didn't see that because of obvious reasons. And it'll be interesting to see how things transpire this year for the hotel industry here in Athens, which is where the TGT comes from.
Member Clodfelder.
And I'm just curious, if I remember correctly, this transit guest tax was going to be the source of the funding that the city was considering supplying to the Bailey's Trail. Now that we have not committed to that, where is it going? Does it go into the general fund, or where does our share of the money reside?
It does. Member Clodfelder, as you may recall, that ordinance was contingent upon the county commissioners also agreeing to match that amount of money. It was $90,000 for the Pay for Success way of financing, helping to finance the Bailey Trail system. That has never materialized, so there was never a set aside. There's no set aside account or anything like that for this money at this time. Council did match, as you recall, council matched the county commissioners in having, I believe it was $30,000 or somewhere thereabouts, to where we matched that for Bailey Trail system improvements. But we have not enacted the longer term payment of $90,000 using the transient guest tax because, again, the county never acted via resolution to match that same amount.
Thank you.
And I'll just add on to this agenda item that I met with the Visitors Bureau board last week, and the Director Troyer and Chair Kaiser and others on that board have done a very good job trying to project budget for this coming year. They did 3 different scenarios based on the possibility of what we see coming in from the TGT. So there are a number of new members of the board, and I was very pleased with how well they seem prepared for this coming year, although obviously revenue is unknown. But I was really pleased with what they've prepared so far, and Director Troyer in particular. Okay, moving on. Next is the Federal Order of Police, Fraternal Order of Police, the contract correction. We have learned that we, in reviewing the FOP contract, there was a monetary error that was not corrected. Basically, it was listed that a replacement vest for a police officer would be $650. That price for those vests has been $800 for some time now, but this was missed in the most recent contract. So Police Chief Pyle has requested a correction to the contract language. He has worked with the union representatives to everybody's on board with this, and so that will simply be correcting the language from $650 to $800 towards the purchase of an initial issue or a replacement vest. Any questions on? Seeing none. We'll move on to the next item, which is the fire contract. It's to ratify the contract with the fire department. It turns out that there is no existing council legislation which authorizes the Athens Fire Department contract, which was negotiated, you may remember, last year and was signed in February of last year. We should have had legislation, and that, of course, is required by the law. And so we would like to get this on the agenda next week to get authorization to sign that contract retroactively. There's really nothing else we can do there. It was an oversight, and it's already a contract that is happening, and we just need to get it authorization to sign that. Okay, and then moving on, we have vacancies in the city of Athens. You are all probably aware that we have quite a few vacancies in the city of Athens, and this is a bit different than other times, of course, primarily due to the COVID situation, as well as having to handle retirements and, unfortunately, deaths and all the other things that happen when positions become open. The city administration has done a good job of not rushing to fill positions, as we understand our budget. But we now have a number of positions which do need to be filled. There is a request to hire a police officer. I will note that there are currently 5 open positions in the police department. 3 of those are officers. 1 is a parking enforcement officer, and 1 is a data entry. But the police chief is requesting to hire 1 police officer. Yes, Member Fall.
Well, I had a quick question. Is that a staff line that can or cannot be changed by council? I guess my question would be, instead of a police officer, is it possible to hire some kind of other person for the police, say a social worker, if one is needed? Now, I know that the police do have certain staff lines like that. Are they filled right now? And just that sort of thing, to see the balance of what's going on in the police department. Does that make sense?
It does.
Thank you.
I'll just say that we've had discussions with Chief Pyle about this issue. There is a professional psychologist who is a member of the police force. I believe that the request is specifically for a patrolling officer, which is what the department needs. Right. I don't know if Mayor has any other information.
Well, and we also have hired and has worked for the police department for several years, Molly Birchfield, who is a support service through the police department. But as long as he hasn't fallen asleep, I believe that Chief Pyle is actually on the meeting tonight. And I'll let Chief Pyle speak to the police department.
And let me, I would like this to be able to come out, because I think that a lot of people are confused about some of the services that are offered, both from the public safety point of view and for our public safety officers. So thank you for talking about this, and thank you, Tom, for coming and talking about it.
Happy to. The position that we're requesting is specifically sworn police officer. It's not. This is not a position that we could hire a licensed social worker to fill. We need a trained police officer in this position. The only way we could hire a social worker is if council went through the process of reducing the numbers of staff in the police department and creating positions. And we already employ a licensed social worker, as the mayor mentioned, in Molly Birchfield, have since the late 90s under the Violence Against Women Act grant, the VAWA grant. She is specifically a victim's advocate and a women's advocate, or a spousal abuse and sexual assault advocate. The list goes on. And then, as Councilmember Crowell, I believe, mentioned, we've had David Malawista, who's a retiree from and chief clinician from the Athens Mental Health Center, the Athens Behavioral Health Care Center, has been employed with the police department since the early 70s. And so we have those positions filled and taken care of. So what we're experiencing now is we actually have 2 sworn officer positions that are currently vacant. We just realized a resignation for an officer moving to another area of the state. I have 2 officers scheduled to retire, in 2021. And I have as many as 3 officers considering changing job paths or changing careers. One is actively in schooling, and 2 are considering just getting out of the profession altogether. And so, as you know, hiring police officers takes a considerable amount of time. This position we want to fill, we had a person teed up, so to speak, ready to hire, ready to give a start date to back in February. And then the pandemic struck and we delayed the hire. So now with 2 people getting ready to retire, 2 vacant positions, and as many as 3 or 4 considering career path changes, it would be really dangerous of us to not to hire this person. It's the last person off of the existing list. In order for us to hire again, we would have to give a new test. And that's more than problematic, given the fact that we can't hardly put people into a room or a testing hall in close proximity with one another to give a test. So we'll be struggling with that. I just don't want the police department to get too understaffed. 6 or 7 vacancies is more than 35% of the available staff to patrol the city. And as you can tell by reading the reports, our theft reports are through the roof. Our robbery and burglary reports are creeping up. And I think we need the police officers on the street, quite frankly. We don't employ that many as it stands.
Thank you for describing that and such. I think that's really important for people to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Smedley?
Crow, and I had nothing further to add, just to echo what Member Fall was saying, that it's important that that sort of information is shared. So Chief Pyle, again, appreciate your sharing that and informing all of us on the situation and then what the needs are for the city. And thank you, Member Fall, for bringing it up.
Thank you, Chief Pyle. Moving on, if no other questions, there is also a request to fill a vacancy in the Engineering and Public Works, a labor supervisor for the Streets Department. The information I have is as of December 1st, there were 9 vacancies in EPW. So this will be an important to have this Streets Labor Supervisor position filled. That is the other request that will be coming in front of council next week. Okay, and seeing nothing on that, moving on to the last item on Finance and Personnel agenda, public depositories. This is an item that is basically just taking care of business. The City of Athens is required by the Ohio Revised Code to designate our public depositories. And the way this works is that the Athens treasurer sends out applications to any eligible banks, both for interim monies and active funds of the city. And then she works, or the treasurer works with the law director to determine the designations to be made to those financial institutions that qualify. Now, all of this must take place by March 1st. And so this is also going to require an emergency clause and suspension of the rules next week. We will be doing a first reading and voting for adoption next week on 2 resolutions, one for the interim monies and one for the active funds. And then in February, there will be a final resolution, which will basically make the final designations of those institutions that the city will have as official depositories. Any questions about this piece of busy work? Okay, thank you, President Isley. That ends Finance and Personnel.
I think we might have one other small thing to come through finance, and that's for the revolving loan fund administrative agreement.
Yes, that didn't make it onto the agenda, but I do have some information on that.
And I think it's basically that it's up for renewal.
Right. We will need to be adopting an ordinance next week. The deadline for the submission is February 1st. This is basically, a revolving loan fund agreement that will extend through 2023. I believe it is signed by the mayor. And this is obviously directly with the Athens County Economic Development Council. And basically the agreement is to really maintain, adequate program oversight and ensure that we're all adhering to the terms of the agreement and the administration of the revolving loan fund program. And this is a 3-year agreement. So that'll also be coming up next week. Thank you for the reminder, President Isley. Yes, Mayor Patterson.
And again, just to echo what President Isley was saying, and I believe you said this as well, Councilman Crowell, is that we need to suspend this. I mean, this is going to have to be hurried through because we do have to get this signed document back to DSA by February 1. We just received this document, the agreement, late last week, Thursday, I believe, is when we received it. And so we got it rather late, which is odd, but it is what it is. So we'll have to move this through quickly.
Okay, that ends Finance and Personnel. Thank you, President Isley.
You had quite the list. Okay, thank you, Councilmember Crowell. And now we'll move on to another list, equally important though, but it's a short one, with Councilmember Grace and the City Safety Services. And she's the chair and joined by Councilmembers Fall and Clodfelter.
Thank you, President Isley. Yes, we're short and sweet this evening in City and Safety Services. And we just need to discuss the fact that our water treatment plant needs some new salt. This is fluoride and lab reagents for the softening of the water. And some good news here, as those of us on council know, we have been working as a city for many years to put improvements in place in our water treatment facilities. And that has helped cut down on the cost of the salt, the amount of salt and solvents that we need. So for 2016, 17, and 18, it was a $200,000 budget for salt. And for 2021, we're down to $155,000 as a projected cost. And so we are realizing some savings due to improvements made and reducing the amount of salt that is needed. So pretty simple. Does anyone have any questions about this? Yes, Member Clodfelter.
Just one out of curiosity. I know that last year, Bob Hetty, I believe, was the person who was able to save us $40,000 by buying the road salt for this winter in May, kind of out of the heavy demand season. I don't know if there would be any possibility of getting some kind of savings if this salt for the water treatment plant were purchased at a particular time of year, or if that might be worth exploring.
I see the mayor shaking his head, confirming, like my intuitive thought is cities have to have this year round to keep our water treatment plant functioning. And so the demand is consistent, and thus the cost would be as well. Is that correct? Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
No, that's correct. Thank you, Member Grace. It's a great question, Member Clodfelter, but it's a very different salt, but two, as Member Grace was saying, this is used for daily operations of the water treatment plant, as opposed to what in the past had seemed to be random snow events. We seem to have had quite a few of them so far this year, but it was a great move to purchase those kind of in the off-peak time, and prices were low. So there's a difference between the types of salt and the ways in which they're used throughout the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, that concludes my committee for this evening. Thank you, President Nicely.
Thank you, Councilmember Grace. We have two items, not one, on the committee of the whole. One of them just arrived this morning to the mayor and myself from our Buckeye Hills, Buckeye Regional Council. That's part of the Council of Governments, of which we're a part. And they are asking for a one reading resolution of support as Governor DeWine looks at our next biennial budget and the amount for the Buckeye Hills Regional Council and also the Governor's Office of Appalachia. And these are both organizations that have provided an incredible amount of program support to our community and all throughout the Appalachian region. So with council's consensus, I think we could bring that forward. We have a sample resolution, and it would just be a one reading next week. I see a thumbs up and nods yes. Okay. they do incredible work. Thank you. The second item is a little more complicated, but one that with a recommendation actually from the university, I'm bringing this forward to you tonight. And I know that City Planner Paul Logue is here with us. The city planner and myself serve on the Ridges Advisory Committee, and we're joined by Pam Callahan, who's a former university planner and a member of our Historic Preservation Commission, Lenny Eliason, president of the County Commissioners, Tom O'Grady, who's with Southeast Ohio History Center, and Deb Schaefer, who is the vice president for finance and administration. On November 30th, the Ridges Advisory Committee had a meeting, and they were informed of conditions on the roof of several of the Ridges building. And Scott, if you can show us that panel, that map, do you have that available for just a moment? It's buildings 2, 3, and 4, and these are the buildings that are next to the Kennedy Museum. So if you think of the front panel of the Kennedy, and then there are several wings that have extended. One was the women's unit, the other side was the men's and women's units. Over the past several years, the university has made a considerable investment. Approximately $25 million has gone into the Ridges. 20 of that went into the 16, to the renovation of buildings 13, 14, and 18. So that's the other side of that tier going down. So they've renovated one side, they moved in last March. The other side is vacant. So there, if we can, I don't know if we can rotate that or not, but the green section of building 1 is the Kennedy Museum area. And then buildings 2, 3, and 4 are the ones that are unoccupied at this moment. And they have holes in the roof. So, so that's a pretty that's a shocking piece of information. And the university and Paul and I have spent some time with several meetings with people, brainstorming about ways that we might be able to come up with a revenue to repair that. The estimates are anywhere from $648,000 for a temporary patch of the holes of the tarp that was placed on the roof 5 years ago. And to what's probably longer term needed is $4.3 million. So, the university, also to their credit, along with investing these other tens of millions of dollars, has been in contact with developers to see if they might be interested. And they have hosted several meetings and talked to approximately 15 developers. I think that's the number. But the bottom line on this situation is that at this point, the university is in a financial position that they are interested in sharing the cost of the $685,000 in repair. So they're saying they could come up with about $200,000 to $300,000 to put a temporary repair on the temporary tarps. So we've been talking, and the county, I think I can speak on it for the county to say that they would be willing to explore the possibility of bonds long term for if there were something to do with to invest in senior housing, that might be a way that's a possibility. Another one has been the possibility of developing portions of these buildings for condominium development. So, Paul, I know that you've had some conversations with the Historic Preservation Commission last month in this. Do you have some updates that you'd like to share on this?
Thank you, Council President Nisley. Just a little bit from the Preservation Commission's perspective. They did have a meeting this evening that ended about a half hour before council started. This was on our agenda, as well as Pilcher House, which was recently sold by Ohio University. I don't have any update on Pilcher. I'll leave it at that. They have concerns about it, as you all can imagine. Pam Callahan, who serves on the Ridges Advisory, is also on the city's preservation board. They did talk a little bit about some brainstorming opportunities about other groups to reach out to, perhaps, to try to spread the word on this. It's clear from the university's perspective, I think, that they're telling us that they do not have the resources to provide for this. And right now there is water getting in. Well, when it rains, there is water getting into those buildings right now because the temporary patch has failed. I guess as it was expected to. It was a five-year patch or so, and it's been about 5 years on that tarp. There's also been some birds that have been tearing out at portions of it too, if I'm not mistaken. They didn't have any great ideas up front. A couple things that they talked about, though, was seeing if there's any opportunity to work with the state. The capital budget was just approved last month by the Ohio legislature, and the governor signed off on that. There's no money set in that capital budget for this need, of course. But Richard Vetter, one of our preservation board members, he was interested in looking around at the state a little bit, talking with some elected officials, talking with our local legislators, both at the House and the state Senate, to see if there's any opportunity for them to participate, or if they knew of any pools of money at the state that might be able to help out. So I thought that was a good discussion that we had. We've also been reaching out to other leaders around the state, including Ohio History Connection, Heritage Ohio, Preservation Ohio, and I've got an email out to a representative from the Appalachian Regional Commission, just want to pick people's brains and better so that they understand the situation with this building, and that there's a large constituency working to help the university out. This is obviously, the Ridges is a regional, if not a statewide asset. It is one of the things that we are known for in this community. we, at least in my opinion, it is something that it's worth the effort for us to try to work with the university to get a solution here. What's important to note is that there is not a long-term plan for that building. The university has tried public-private partnerships in the past. They're interested in trying to redo that again, having conversations about things just like Commissioner Eliason stated about senior housing or something like that there. So there is a lot of things that they would like to see happen there. There just haven't been a lot of takers yet or people that have been interested in it. But it feels as if the timing is pretty ripe for something like that. There's a lot of tax incentives that private developers could utilize at that building. The university has an example of what can be done with all the investments they've made into the buildings on the left side of the museum. And we're just all working really hard to get this one, try to make sure that we've done our due diligence to help out here. I'll leave it at that. I'll pass it back to Chris Nisley.
Thank you. The Regis Advisories Committee did issue a letter to President Nellis and to the chairman of the board, Janelle Coleman, on December 16th and suggested following the director of facilities at OU's recommendation to do the $1 million repair, because it at least gets you, the temporary patches may not even get you through the season. So his recommendation was the $1 million. And the Ridges Advisory Committee concurred, but they don't have the money, is what they have said, and if that they could share a portion, and then that portion that they're suggesting to share is $200,000 to $300,000 at this point. So we're working as hard as we can. If you have other ideas, we're also working with some federal grant opportunities. It's called Saving, I'm going to draw a blank on the name, Saving Ohio's Treasures, or Saving Treasures. It's through the National Park Service. And so we're working to look at the guidelines on that to see if we might qualify for applying for funding. Councilmember Clodfelter, yes.
Though I would say that though we have no guarantees that there would be more funding for things like this, I would suggest, I do understand that it's raining in the buildings. That sounds horrible. I hope they have good buckets, but maybe it would be good to wait and see what the next federal administration does, if perhaps they will be providing more funding for uses like this. Or if lobbying efforts might be able to persuade them to do so before any firm commitments are made. I would hate to see the city have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars if, in fact, there might be something that would be happening in February or so, or March maybe, when the federal government, if we could possibly wait.
Well, and right, and given the general revenue, I can see the look on the mayor's face too, and the auditor, I'm sure, is observing at home. There aren't the general revenue funds either at the city or the county level right now to be able to make it, as wonderful as that would be to try and do that. I hope I'm not misspeaking that, but I don't think they're the general revenue funds for us to even consider doing that. So that's why we're pursuing grants or development opportunities. But thank you for the comments, Councilmember Clodfelter. If you have further ideas, share them with us. We would love to hear them. We will pursue all the avenues we can, as Paul mentioned, with legislators. I know the mayor has offered to make some contacts with different people in different state and federal offices, and we'll continue to work our hardest at this. But yep, there's rain coming in on the roof. So through the roof, in fact, into the building. And a building won't last long when it starts to get that kind of structural damage. So, Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Nisley. I think we probably all feel the same way about the Ridges. And I just wanted to say that this is a remarkable piece of Athens, and the history is a part of who we are, and a part of the university, and a part of the city, and the entire area up there. I spent so much time walking up there I've spent, most of my life up on the ridges, and obviously it's a question of money, and it's a question of how we can help. But I am 100% into seeing what we can do to try to save what we can save. Part of a group, Age-Friendly Athens County, which is looking at all kinds of ways to support all walks of life, but looking particularly at those who are nearing retirement or are retired. And it would be an ideal place, I think, for a retirement community. It's just a matter of finding the money for it. And I would be very excited to be helpful in any way in trying to preserve these buildings, because they truly are. They're special. I'd say not just across the nation, but really worldwide. And I think that if we can find the grant money that can help us do this, I just think it's really, really important. But I would imagine we're all sort of on the same page. Thank you.
Councilmember Katsas, and then Mayor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. And this was just thinking about this conversation back in 1988 when I graduated from high school, and I had my first job with the university working for the physical plant. That was the same summer that the university was gifted these buildings from the mental health institutions. And so as the story goes, Charles Ping's wife, Claire, went up there, and she thought that they needed to be cleaned out. So every time that it rained, instead of us working on the flower beds, they would send us up there with these masks that pale into comparison to what everybody's wearing right now. And we'd go in with brooms and we would knock these paint chips. And when I mean chips, I mean they were hanging off the ceiling, a couple feet down. And that's how I spent my summer, kind of running around, learning what the magnitude of the size of those specific buildings, running up and down the spiral staircases, and kind of having a time with a bunch of lead paint. But the university was the one that could take those and do something with them. There was nobody else that could do that, and they've already done a lot of great work up there. And I look forward, hopefully, that they're able to get over this bump and figure out the next steps to preservation. It's that 32 years that we're working. That there are 33 years that they're working on this.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Katsas. Mayor Patterson.
Thanks for that story, Member Katsas. That was fun. I'm glad you didn't eat any of those paint chips. That's a good thing. I do want to share. I have shared this with President Nisley. I've shared it with City Planner Paul Logue. The university has, as Paul indicated, is recently. I didn't know that it had sold. I know it was out there that they were accepting bids for the Pilcher House, another historic house on the College Green. There's Cruson House, which is an OU property, which used to house, I think it was diversity and inclusion, or I can't remember who it housed, but regardless, it's been vacant for some time. I would like to work with the university to come up with a plan if they are going to start vacating historic structures, that money be put back into a historic building, that being the Ridges. I don't know what Pilcher House sold for, but I would imagine it wasn't an inexpensive purchase. It's kind of relinquished themselves of control over a historic facility, and money, I believe, could be reinvested into a historic building. And so, again, just as a plan, Paul, you might want to chime in, because I know that you worked more with Shauna Bolin when it came to the small houses and the plan with the small houses. Certainly some of them will continue to be used by Ohio University, but I certainly question what will happen with Cruson, which, if anybody's been in Cruson House, it's an absolutely gorgeous house inside with its woodwork in there. But I also know that Cruson House has some pretty significant maintenance issues unto itself, which is why it had to be vacated. Paul, anything to add to that?
Not much. With respect to Pilcher, my understanding is that there was 3 sealed bids that were submitted for it, one of which was selected. I believe that at least two of those 3 bids were from business people in Athens, but I don't know who, and I don't know who was awarded or for what price. It did sound, from what the members of the preservation board said, it did sound like it went, the process was easy and it went well. The university had documents in there that required that any work that's done as part of it, that they follow standards for historic preservation. So I know that should put to a lot of people had concerns that somebody could utilize that as an opportunity to tear down and have a prime piece of real estate. The university tried to ensure against that. I think that same method, if it was successful, maybe they will be using that for Cruson and a few others. I don't recall when I worked on that small houses plan with Shauna Bolin and a few others from the university, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I think there's only 1 or 2 buildings that they designated for anticipated tearing down, one of which has already been torn down on University Terrace at Union Street at Jeff Hill. And then I think all the other ones were either going to be reused for or repurposed for university offices or facilities. And then there was a couple others, including, I think, Cruson, Mayor Patterson, that they were open-minded to selling to a private enterprise to come in. So there might be a good opportunity there. It is a beautiful home, and that is a great location. I can think of a lot of opportunity there. If I had the money to purchase it, I might take a bid on it myself. I do not, though.
Well, and to that point, again, I think that it would be a perfectly good use of revenue generated by selling historic home to put that into, again, the historic ridges. I feel the same way Peter does about the ridges, as do all of you, I'm sure. I mean, it is the number one iconic building in the city of Athens that everybody recognizes. I went and looked at the Kirkbride building in Traverse City, Michigan, and it was funny. Take just one glimpse and I'm going, that's the ridges. Here's the ridges. I mean, the Kirkbride building is probably one of the most recognizable structures in the U.S., aside from maybe a Frank Lloyd Wright home, which I'm also partial to.
So, well, thank you very much for these comments, and we'll work as hard as we can. And looking forward to seeing you all. We're not going to be meeting next Monday night. We're meeting next Tuesday, because Monday being Martin Luther King Day. And take care, and we'll see you all then.